The crack of a chopper bike doing a wheelie down your street. The smell of your dad's Brut aftershave mixing with pipe smoke. The sound of the ice cream van playing Greensleeves on a Saturday afternoon. If you grew up in Britain in the 1980s, you lived through a decade that was rough, raw, and absolutely unforgettable. We've tracked down 20 things that only proper 80s kids will understand, and some of them will transport you straight back to your childhood. Thursday night at 7:30, the whole family gathered round the telly for Top of the Pops, and that was your entire music education sorted. You'd sit through the acts you didn't care about just to catch your favourites, and if you missed it, that was it. No catch-up, no YouTube, just bad luck until next week. Your older sister would have the cassette recorder ready to tape the songs off the telly, and you'd argue about whether to talk over the DJ bits or keep quiet. The charts actually meant something because they were the only way to know what was popular. Now kids stream whatever they want, whenever they want, and the idea of appointment television seems mental. But waiting all week for Top of the Pops taught you patience, and made music feel like an event rather than background noise. That theme tune and those credits meant Thursday night, and missing it meant missing out on the only music show that mattered. When you were out and needed to call home, you found a red phone box, shoved your 10 pence in, and hoped nobody had vandalised it or urinated in it overnight. Those heavy doors, the smell of stale cigarettes, the button you had to press when someone answered. It was a proper ritual. You'd have a stack of 10 pence pieces ready for longer calls, and you'd watch them drop as the timer counted down. If you ran out of change mid-conversation, that was it. Call over. See you when you get home. Phone boxes were community infrastructure, not heritage decorations, and knowing where the nearest working one was could be the difference between getting picked up or walking 5 miles home. Now everyone's glued to their mobile, and phone boxes are either museums or toilets. But back then, they represented independence and connection, the ability to sort yourself out when you were away from home. You had BBC One, BBC Two, ITV, and if you were lucky enough to get the signal, Channel 4 from 1982 onwards. That was your lot, and if nothing good was on, you read a book or went outside. Someone, usually the youngest, was the remote control, getting up to turn the chunky dial every time Dad wanted to switch over. You'd watch things you weren't really interested in just because they were on, and TV guides were essential reading every Sunday. The idea of choice paralysis didn't exist because there was no choice. You watched what was broadcast when it was broadcast, and you were grateful for it. Now people complain about having nothing to watch, despite having 500 streaming services. But back then, 4 channels was plenty because telly hadn't taken over your entire life. The milkman came round before dawn, and you'd hear the bottles clinking on doorsteps while you were still in bed. Your mum would bring them in before school, and in winter the cream would freeze and push the foil cap up like a little hat. You'd leave the empties out for collection, and the milkman knew everyone on his route by name. If you were lucky, he'd deliver orange juice, eggs, and sometimes even bread, all before most people were awake. Now everyone drives to Tesco for plastic bottles of milk that tastes of nothing, and the personal service has completely vanished. But the milkman represented a Britain that functioned on trust and routine, where your doorstep wasn't a crime scene waiting to happen, and people still provided services rather than just shifting products. You'd sit with your finger hovering over the record button, waiting for the DJ to shut up so you could capture your favourite song on a C90 cassette. The timing had to be perfect. Start too early and you'd get the DJ's voice, too late and you'd miss the intro. You'd build up compilation tapes over weeks, carefully labelling them with biro, and those tapes were precious because they represented hours of patient waiting. The sound quality was rubbish. You'd always get some idiot talking over the intro, but that tape was yours and nobody could take it away. Now people have millions of songs available instantly and value none of them. Recording off the radio taught you that music had value because getting it required effort, patience, and perfect timing. The sweet shop had big glass jars lined up behind the counter, and you'd point at what you wanted while the shopkeeper weighed it out into a little white paper bag. Blackjacks, fruit salads, sherbet dib-dabs, flying saucers, refreshers, all 4 for a penny each, and you'd make your pocket money stretch all week. The shopkeeper knew all the kids by name and would tell your mum if you'd been in spending money when you should have been at school. Now sweets come in plastic packets from faceless supermarkets, and the personal service has vanished along with the corner shops. But those sweet shops were community hubs where kids learned about money, choice and consequence. The shopkeeper was part of the social fabric, and losing them meant losing another connection between people. When the miners went on strike and the power went out, you'd sit round with candles and calogas heaters, making the best of it. Your mum kept torches by every bed, and you'd do your homework by candlelight like you were living in Victorian times. The telly would go off mid-programme, and you'd just have to sit there talking to your family like people used to before electricity took over everything. Those power cuts were inconvenient, but they taught you that modern convenience was fragile, and that you could cope without it. Now, if the Wi-Fi drops for 5 minutes, people act like civilization's collapsed. But 80s kids learned resilience through actual hardship, not through motivational Instagram posts. The top deck of every bus was thick with cigarette smoke, and nobody thought twice about it. Your dad would light up on the train, the bloke next to you in the cinema would be puffing away, and restaurants had ashtrays on every table. It was just normal, part of the atmosphere, and if you didn't like it tough, you were the odd one out for complaining. Now you can't smoke anywhere, and the younger generation can't imagine a world where fag smoke was just part of daily life. The 80s were the last gasp of smoking culture before the health brigade took over, and whether you smoked or not, you lived with it because that's what everyone did. You take your film to Boots, hand it over the counter, and wait a week to see if any of your photos had actually come out. 24 or 36 exposures, and you'd make each shot count because film cost money. When you picked up your envelope, you'd tear it open right there in the shop, and half of them would be blurry, overexposed, or pictures of someone's thumb. There was no deleting, no retakes, no filters, just whatever the camera captured and whatever the developer printed. Now people take 500 photos of the same thing and delete 499 of them. But waiting for photos taught you patience and made the good ones actually mean something because you'd invested time and money in capturing them. Saturday afternoon football meant genuine risk of violence, and if you went to an away match, you knew you might be running from opposition fans or the police or both. Terraces were standing room only, tribal, and absolutely mental, and the crowd was part of the spectacle as much as the match itself. You'd hear stories about firms and fights, and whether you were involved or not, football had an edge that made it feel genuinely dangerous and exciting. Now it's all-seater stadiums, expensive tickets and prawn sandwiches, and the atmosphere's been sanitised for families and tourists. The 80s were the last era of proper football culture, before money and safety regulations tamed it completely. Whether that's good or bad depends on your perspective, but anyone who was there knows modern football is a different sport entirely. Your dad's copy of The Sun would be lying on the breakfast table with page 3 staring up at you, and nobody batted an eyelid. It was just normal, part of British newspaper culture, and whether you agreed with it or found it tasteless, it was everywhere. Blokes would openly read it on the bus in the factory canteen at their desks, and society just accepted it as one of those things that existed. Now page 3's gone, and the culture wars have decided it was exploitative and degrading, and maybe they're right. But in the 80s, it represented a Britain that was unself-conscious about sex and didn't agonise over every aspect of public life. The fact that it's vanished tells you how much Britain has changed in 40 years. Your house was heated by a coal fire in the front room, and every other room was absolutely freezing. Your dad would lug in the coal from the bunker out back, and your mum would bank up the fire, last thing at night so it'd still be warm in the morning. You'd toast bread on a fork in front of the fire, and getting dressed for school meant running downstairs, grabbing your clothes and getting changed in front of the only source of heat in the house. Central heating existed, but was for posh people and most working families made do with coal and maybe an electric bar fire in the bedrooms if you were really fancy. Those coal fires represented a Britain that was still industrial, still connected to physical fuel that you could see and touch. Getting rid of them made homes warmer, but also more disconnected from the basic realities of energy and heat. Friday night meant a trip to the video shop to rent something for the weekend, and if you got there too late, all the good films would be gone. You'd walk up and down the aisles reading the backs of VHS cases, and half the time you'd rent something rubbish just because the cover looked exciting. The bloke behind the counter would know what you liked and would recommend stuff, and you'd have to rewind it before returning it or face a fine. Now people scroll through Netflix for an hour and still can't decide what to watch, and the personal service has vanished entirely. But the video shop was a weekly ritual that made watching films feel special because you'd invested time and effort in choosing them. When streaming killed video shops, it killed another piece of community infrastructure that actually brought people together. The 80s were defined by strikes. Miners, printers, dockers, teachers, and whether your family was union or not, industrial action shaped your childhood. You'd see picket lines on the news every night, and the country felt like it was at war with itself. Your dad might have been out on strike, or he might have been crossing picket lines, and dinner table conversations got heated about Thatcher, Scargill, and whether the unions had too much power or not enough. Now unions are neutered, strikes are rare, and most people under 40 don't understand what collective bargaining even means. The 80s were the last time working people had real industrial power, and watching it get broken changed Britain fundamentally. Whether you think that was good or bad depends on your politics, but everyone who lived through it knows the country that emerged was completely different from the one that went in. Every street had a corner shop run by a family who lived above it, and you'd go there for bread, milk, fags for your dad, and penny sweets. The shopkeeper knew your name, knew your mum, and would let you buy stuff on tick if your family was trusted. You'd be sent there with a note and exact change, and you'd come back with what was needed, plus whatever sweets you'd managed to sneak past your mum's accounting. Now corner shops are either Tesco Express or closed completely, and the personal connection has been replaced by self-service checkouts and security cameras. But those family-run shops were the glue that held communities together, places where people talked, gossiped, and looked out for each other. When they vanished, neighbourhoods became collections of strangers rather than actual communities. Whether your family loved Thatcher or hated her, the 80s were defined by her, and you couldn't escape it. The miners' strike in 84 to 85 split the country down the middle, and you were either with the miners or against them, depending on where you lived and what your dad did for work. You'd see police in riot gear on the news, communities torn apart, and a level of political intensity that made everything feel urgent and important. Now politics is performance and personality, but in the 80s it was visceral and real, about jobs and livelihoods, and whether entire communities would survive or die. Growing up in that environment taught you that politics mattered, and that the decisions made in Westminster had direct consequences for ordinary people. The scars from that decade are still visible in former mining towns that never recovered. Playgrounds in the 80s were death traps, metal slides that burned your legs in summer, roundabouts that could launch you into orbit, and climbing frames over solid concrete. You'd fall off, graze yourself bloody, and your mum would tell you to stop crying and get back out there. There were no soft landings, no safety inspectors, no risk assessments, just equipment designed to test whether you could hold on or not. Now playgrounds are padded, safe, and boring, and kids grow up without ever experiencing actual physical risk. But those dangerous playgrounds taught you consequences, made you careful, and built a generation that understood cause and effect through split lips and scraped knees. Whether modern playgrounds are better is debatable, but they're certainly less character building. Every glass bottle was worth money back then, 2p, 5p, sometimes 10p, and you'd collect them from wherever you could find them to cash in at the off-licence. You'd scour dumps, hedgerows and ditches looking for Corona bottles, and your pocket money was supplemented by however many bottles you could find. The off-license would take them, check they weren't cracked, and hand over the deposit without question. Now everything's plastic and throwaway, and the idea of reusing bottles seems quaint rather than sensible. But the deposit system meant less waste, more recycling, and taught kids that resources had value. When that system vanished, we lost both an environmental solution and a way for kids to earn their own money through actual effort. Christmas Day telly was an event, and you'd wait all day for the film your family wanted to watch together. There was no Netflix, no recording, no watching whatever you wanted, just what the BBC and ITV decided to broadcast. You'd sit through the Queen's speech at 3 o'clock because that's what everyone did, then wait for the big film at 6:30 or 7. If you missed it, you'd missed it forever, or at least until they repeated it next Christmas. That shared experience meant Christmas had rhythm and tradition, and everyone in Britain was watching the same things at the same times. Now families sit in separate rooms watching separate screens, and the communal aspect of telly has been completely lost. But waiting all day for one programme made it special, in a way that instant access never can. The 80s were hard. Unemployment, strikes, riots, and a government that didn't apologise for anything. Towns were rough, people were direct, and nothing was sanitised for sensitivity. You learned resilience because you had to, and you learned to cope because nobody was coming to make things easier. It was a decade of extremes, of Thatcher and the miners, of riots and royal weddings, of genuine cultural conflict that shaped everything that came after. Now Britain's softer, safer, more comfortable, but also more anxious, more fragmented, and less sure of itself. The 80s were the last time this country felt genuinely distinct, genuinely British, before globalisation and political correctness smoothed out all the rough edges. Whether that's progress or loss depends on your perspective, but everyone who grew up then knows we lived through something that can never be repeated. From top of the pops to dangerous playgrounds, from phone boxes to coal fires, the 80s made us who we are. If this brought back memories, hit subscribe and watch the next video on screen. Cheers for watching.